Good evening and welcome to the evening on day 8. I hope your sourdough starters are looking beautiful and bubbly and smelling lovely, and you can actually start to bake with them now. If it's looking nice and bubbly, it has risen at least 30, I'd say, to 50% above where you put your elastic, and is kind of domed on the top. So you could see some nice bubbles in the top has risen. It's given that sort of quilted effect. You could start baking with it. So I'm going to have a look at mine, and if they still look good, I'm going to bake with my gluten-free sourdough starters tomorrow and make a loaf of bread, sourdough bread that's gluten-free and hopefully just delicious. All right, let's go check them out. So here's Betty, our brown rice starter, and you can see the line there where it doubled in size and fell back down. So the starter is now in its phase of the life cycle of the bacteria and yeast where the yeast are starting to die off because it's becoming too acidic. And yeast do not like acidity. Bacteria do though. And the lactic acid bacteria are creating the acetic acid and lactic acid, which is making it quite sour smelling. And as it gets a little bit older, this is called an old starter. So once it's gone past its peak activity, it has risen and fallen. That's because the yeast has now started to die off. And when the yeast eats, it produces the carbon dioxide that causes it to rise. So when we see it lowering, that means our yeast is starting to die off. And we obviously don't want that, as we want our bread to rise. That's the whole point in making this. So this is the reason why we want to feed our starter when it's at its peak activity. So when we see those signs that it has the dome top, it's risen up and it hasn't fallen yet and it doesn't smell sour. And this way we will be feeding it at its peak activity and keeping the yeast very happy and healthy and as most active as possible to give us the best rise to our bread. So with Betty here, I just missed its peak activity, so it definitely is ready for a feed. You can use an old starter, however, to make a loaf of bread. It will just make a very sour loaf. So we can talk about that later as well. You can see the ridges and valleys, and they're not super prominent yet, which means that it probably just fell not too long ago. It looks a little bit deflated though. And my starter still smells quite sweet. It's just a little bit sour, not too much. So I think we just missed the peak activity and it's just becoming old. I'll also explain to you later what a young starter is and what a mature starter is. And we actually want to aim to use a mature starter to create our leaven. So when my starter is at that point, I will explain what that means. And don't worry, at the end, I will have a review of everything. So let's get to it and feed our starter. So once you've stirred your starter and you've discarded all but 30 grams, tare your scale again, add your 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. Then you'll give it a really good mix, remember, for at least 2 minutes until it's all incorporated. So depending on when the peak activity is, and you'll start to learn with your sourdough starter, like I said, I want you to know exactly how to do it on your own. I don't want you to have to follow an exact recipe or have someone else tell you. I want you to understand what's happening so that you can look at it and say, I don't think it's quite perfect time to bake yet. Or you can say, I don't want to bake right now. It might be perfectly ready when you wake up in the morning and you might say, this doesn't work with my schedule. So I want you to know what to do so that you can bake it when you want to bake. Looks like it's achieved the right consistency now. So I'll just check it with my jiggle test and then clean around the outsides of my jar, cover it back up, and then check the elastic level and snuggle it up for the evening. And remember, don't throw away your discard. You can bake with it now. And I've put all sorts of exciting and fun ideas into the post below. So if you make something, please share with us. I would love to see some pictures. And we will get together again in the morning and feed our starters. I hope you have the most peaceful and beautiful sleep. Good night.